Alrighty then. Hello, Vermont history students. Whoops. Oh, here. That is the riff to Want You Back by the Jackson 5. That's... It's cool. It's a good song. Hey, this is the video for Unit 10, and I'll try to make it snappy. And what happens is that there's two parts to it. And the first part is about the cool sort of period that runs between the end of World War II and when the interstate highways really get built and begin to kick in big time, the early 1960s, and their changes begin to really dramatically affect Vermont. And then the second part is about the mid-60s to 1970, the governorship of Phil Hoff and his successor Dean Davis, and it culminates in 1970 with the passage of Act 250. Before we get to that, we're rolling along. There's a town meeting next Monday. Today's Wednesday, and there's 3 responses to the discussion board questions. All of the people who wrote in agreed that a lack of regulation was a bigger problem than was a bigger danger to Vermont than too much regulation to the uphill way of life, and that's fine because a lot of regulation came in, and that's to a great extent what this video is about, what this section is about, and what we want to talk about today. So here's the thing about it, right? You come out of World War II. Come out of World War II, 1946 or so, and the period between 1946 and about 1960, in my heart, is a really cool era in Vermont history. It's that sort of like netherworld where we've left behind the old Vermont, but haven't quite gotten to the new one yet. And there's a huge question people recognize, which is, are Vermonters going to control their own future? Are Vermonters going to be in charge of managing and adjusting to the changes that are inevitably coming? Or is Vermont going to sort of get run over and steamrolled by changes that come from the outside world? You can see how the changes are already going on with the evolution of the economy. The old economy is dying out. As we said last time, paper making, lumbering, textiles, quarrying, and to a great extent dairy farms. Vermont had, at the end of World War II, had about 24,000 dairy farms. Over the next 30 years, it lost an average of 2 dairy farms per week for 30 years. Small dairy farms go out, bigger dairy farms that function according to economy of scale need to take their place. And so Vermont, the old Vermont of sort of poor, backwater, isolated, rural state is dying out, and Vermont's going to become something different. We talked about last time about George Aiken as being sort of a model, as an agent of change for how that evolution took place. And after World War II, it's a pretty crass thing to not say that people of French-Canadian heritage who fought to defeat Nazism and save democracy aren't French Canadians. I mean, to a great extent, the term Vermonter had been widened out and really took on sort of like, if you're born here, is a very dominant definition. But then how is Vermont going to control its destiny? The model I wanted to give you, and you can read the article that I also posted, was about Susie Wilson. Many of you may know about Essex, Susie Wilson Road out there. I knew it well. When I taught at UVM for 10 years, I lived in Essex and had to drive on Susie Wilson Road, a nightmarish parking lot of a traffic jam every single morning. And what the deal was, Susie Wilson had this house. She was a farm wife who was widowed. She had this house right there on the corner where Susie Wilson Road was cut, along Route 15, right next to 40th and Allen. And during World War II, what happened was there was lots of soldiers from other places who were stationed at 40th and Allen. And at night, these soldiers began being in the habit of going over to Susie Wilson's house. She said she was just treating them to dinner, maybe offering them some entertainment and some sociability with some of the local young girls, women from Essex and Westford and Fairfax and all of that. But the rumor arose very strong, and a lot of people believed that Susie Wilson actually was running a house of prostitution. The thing about it is that then Susie Wilson died, and then after that Essex got big because this guy whose name was Watson, who ran IBM, was skiing often at Stowe, and decided that that Vermont would be a great place to locate an IBM factory. You'd be doing a big favor for his workers because Vermont's such a wonderful place to live. So he located the IBM plant in Essex. Now this is about skiing, of course, as well. Skiing really picks up after World War II to a great extent. There's hundreds of small ski resorts. Gradually you get bigger ones pushing out the smaller ones. Stowe is a big one, and then Killington comes in the 50s as well, which is a long and interesting story that I won't tell you. But what happens is that when Essex got big, then it becomes a company town for IBM, and doctors and lawyers locate there, and the high school gets big, and people from away move there, and the uphillers can't afford to live in Essex anymore. And the sort of border between downhill and uphill Vermont begins to move out towards Jericho and Underhill. In the present day, it's moved all the way out past Underhill. Many of you may know well. But uphillers can't afford to live in Essex anymore. And so what happens is that, not that uphillers ever told downhillers their secrets, as you know, but there had been people who knew whether or not Susie Wilson, that farm wife, actually ran a house of prostitution, but they got pushed out. And this is an important thing because community is not buildings and trees and roads and things like this. Community is shared experiences. You don't just move to a place and you're part of the community immediately. It takes a long time. Community accrues slowly, like a coral reef. And so what happens is that Watson with IBM wanted to give his workers a great Vermont experience and have them live in a beautiful Vermont town. And it's fine. I love living in Essex. But Essex got big, and the old community changed, and people got pushed out. And so then Essex became very much like the place where people had come, like Westchester County, New York. And that's the thing about it that Vermont had to deal with, is how do you negotiate change in a way that you save community? I'm not going to beat you over the head with the Swede story. The Swedes and their descendants are still around. Lottie Nyreen, who came over when she was 14 in 1890, she was 14, she lived to be 100. And at this point she was living down in Arlington. But what happened to Landgrove, the town they lived in, was this guy from New Jersey, Sam Ogden, moved there in 1929, and he began to buy up all the houses in Landgrove and fix them up, and then he sold them to wealthy people from New Jersey. And then what happened was that all the old uphill people got pushed out of Landgrove. And if you go there now, the houses are huge. It's a really fancy place. And is this what's going to happen to all of Vermont? Is Vermont going to be like a plaything, a playground for the wealthy? Is it going to be a place where normal people can afford to live anymore? And that's the question about regulation. And so this leads to, in the 1960s, a huge flurry of activity of Vermonters trying to grab control of their own destiny. It's really sort of signified by the governorship of Phil Hoff, the first Democrat to be governor in Vermont since before the Civil War. How he got to be governor is an interesting story, but I won't tell you that either. Hoff came in, and first thing that Phil Hoff realized was that the state was being run like it was the 1880s still. He had no information as far as budget, like expenditures and income for the next year, and so he spent a little while gathering all sorts of information, trying to modernize state government. Another big thing was that reapportionment of the legislature took place in 1965. Vermont, since its founding, had had one town, one vote legislature, house, and this had meant that a town like Stratton or Belvedere or Baltimore or Averill or whatever, tiny towns, had the same representation as Burlington. Something like 12% of the state population could muster a majority. That's the smallest 126 towns in Vermont, because there's 250, right? So they reapportioned the legislature by population, and a lot of people look back at that, knew at the time that that was a huge turning point in the death of the old Vermont. And then Hoff was able to do all these studies, and I put some documents online that give you a sort of scenic landscapes and controlling and managing growth and a vision and choice and how are we going to go about controlling our destiny. They banned billboards. They had a promotional campaign for the state, a tourism campaign called The Beckoning Country, which they had to cancel because it was too popular. The Beckoning Country. And too many people came. There was unregulated development. People were building huge condo developments that resulted in all sorts of problems with schools, with mail delivery, with water and other natural resources. Something had to be done. And after a bunch of years of talking about it in studies, and finally Governor Hoff, Phil Hoff, stopped being governor after 3 terms, Dean Davis, a Republican who ran National Life Insurance, became governor, and he was a very environmentalist-minded man himself, and it was under his governorship that Act 250 got passed. Act 250 is a landmark environmental bill. It establishes 10 criteria by which every development needs to be studied: impact on the environment, impact on scenery, etc., etc., impact on the local community. The state is divided into districts, and all development has to go and get Act 250 permits, which drives a lot of people crazy because they feel like they've lost the ability to control their own natural resources. If you want to build an in-ground pool or a shed or whatever, then you have to go get an Act 250 permit. And a lot of people think that the old Vermont of self-sufficiency and local control and the ability to, you know, be left alone died out with all that regulation. But it's, what could you do? If you didn't have regulation, Vermont would have become like New Jersey, which no one wanted. If you have a huge amount of regulation, it makes it really hard to build things. Land value goes up, property values go up, poor people can't afford to live here either. And so that's the conundrum, that's the paradox that Vermont faces, is one of if you have no regulation or if you have too much regulation. And so that is the question that you answered this last time. I hope that you will have a look at the question that I'm asking this time, and hopefully it'll make sense to you, and I'm looking forward to your responses by Friday. And that riff goes like that. It's a cool riff. It's fun. REM riffs are really fun too.